Christmas is a time for serving one another with love. And what better way than to provide a nourishing meal? For someone like Ron, that meal opens the door to new life.
Well, I'm thankful for the food I receive at the mission. It's such a welcoming place. And yeah, now I'm getting the nutrition I need and getting support from a caring community.
This Christmas, love is the way to fight hunger, homelessness, and loneliness in the Greater Toronto Area. Visit scottmission.com to give now. That's scottmission.com.
Blog Talk Radio.
Okay, hello. Can you all hear me now? Can everybody hear me? Okay, let's try this now. Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay. This is weird. I don't know if you can hear me. Okay, there we are. We had a slight technical issue here, and I saw Nick was on the line there. I'm sure it was him, and I hope he calls back in, because that was uncontrollable. And I saw Kathy wrote that I may have muted myself, and actually I don't know, maybe I did, but it didn't look like it. So you never know. But that was strange, and I'm going to send him an email right now. And I was just trying to figure it out. I finally got it. I heard some kind of click, and then it came on. I did make a video today for the chemtrail activities over Toronto, so if you want to check that out in the meantime, take a look on the YouTube page. It's there. It's one of the videos, or in the Facebook group I posted it, and you can have a view of that. So I'm sending him an email now. Hopefully he'll call in. I hope this doesn't scare him away. Okay. Yeah. All right. Hope everybody's day went well. Mine went great. It was nice and warm here. Not like super warm, but sunny, except for the chemtrail activity. You know, like great day overall. A nice spring afternoon, and enjoyed it a lot. Okay, let me see here. Okay, I got 2 callers in. Hello, Nick. Is this you?
Oh, is it me?
Hello, yes. Area code 936.
Oh, yeah, that's me, Thomas.
Okay.
I was just calling you to let you know that it wasn't coming through. And
yeah, I know.
as I got off the phone.
There was a slight technical issue. I have it fixed, so just bear with me for 1 second. Please hold, okay?
Sure.
Hello?
Hello, Nick. Is that you?
Yes, it is.
All right, Nick. We got you. I apologize about that. You know, the Blog Talk Network, there's a technical issue 1 out of every 3 shows that you do, so this happened to be one of those times. Thank you so much for being on the show. I've been looking forward to talking to you for a really long time now, and it's a true honor to have you on. And without further ado, let's get right into this, because I want to find out. I know you had, your writing days in the beginning in the rock world, but did you have, sort of experiences or interest in the paranormal before any of the heavy stuff that started happening and you were writing about?
Yeah, I guess I'm one of those people in the Fortean world, if you like, who has a deep interest in it, but who's never actually had an experience. And the reason why I got involved and interested is that my own dad was in the British Royal Air Force. He worked on radar. And he was involved in several incidents in the 1950s involving UFOs being tracked approaching the British coastline at very high speeds. And this went on over the course of several nights, and nobody knew what these things were. Pilots were sent up. They couldn't even get close to them. Right. And everybody was told after the incidents had finished that, you've signed the government's Official Secrets Act. You won't talk about these events. And my dad didn't tell me about them until I was like 13 or 14. And then, as you mentioned in the introduction just then, when I finished school, I began working on a rock music magazine. I was one of these people who I really wasn't good at school. I was useless. And, I've always admitted to people I walked out with 2 or 3 exam results, which were about the lowest level you could get, and I'm like, wow, I've suddenly gone from being a kid to being in the big wide world. It's like, what do I do now? Right. And although I didn't do very well at school, I always did have a big passion for writing and reading. And so I thought, well, I don't really want to get a straight job in the 9-to-5 world, having some boss tell me what to do and wear some stupid suit or whatever.
Right.
And so I kind of thought, could I, do what a lot of people fear to do is kind of go your own way and do your own thing, and that's what I did. I thought, well, I enjoy writing, I enjoy music. Could I combine the two? That's what I tried to do first, and work freelance for a while also, which is a really freelance work in general is precarious. Freelance writing is probably one of the most precarious of all. But it's something I enjoyed doing, and then as I developed having done the work on the Rock Music magazine and having an interest in paranormal and UFO stuff, thanks to my dad's revelations about his UFO encounter in the 50s, I thought, well, why not try and combine the two? And that sort of took me to where I am today, I suppose. So.
Well, let me ask you: could you go back to just writing about music again, or have you had such a great experience that you would never change a thing now?
Yeah, I mean, the magazine I started working on, this was back in the 80s. It was called Zero. And at the time, I was living in a county in England called the West Midlands, which is basically central England, about 120 miles north of London. Right. And it was essentially, I suppose, writing gig reviews, interviewing bands, getting photographs, doing pieces on, music and fashion links and things like that, and also learning about deadlines and how to put an article together, and how to learning from some of the older guys who were in the company then, how to start a story so you kind of capture the audience's attention, that sort of thing. And, understanding how if an editor says, we need 500 words, you've got to find a way quickly to make sure it doesn't go longer than 500 words. So in other words, I was sort of really thrust into the deep end of understanding how the media works and what they need and what the audience needs as well. A lot of people think you just write a story and you start at page 1 and go to page whatever. But a lot of it is, the idea of instilling in the mind of the reader what the story's about from, the first paragraph or so to capture them and to get them into the heart of the story. So, I learned a lot about this, and I worked on that magazine for probably about 2 years, something like that. And as I said, one of my big passions was and still is music, and so, it was the ideal medium to work in. It was an area that I enjoyed doing. It was a job. I didn't really think of it as a job. It was like people were paying me to listen to, well, back then, vinyl.
Yeah.
It was like, you kind of died and woken up in a, like a dream world or something.
Yeah, dream job, that's for sure.
Yeah, someone's going to pay me money to listen to CDs and review them, or go along to a concert on a Friday night and not have to pay to get in and get paid for actually reviewing the gig. So, but the other thing I enjoyed was the fact that every day was a little bit different, and I actually, as crazy as it said, I enjoyed the thing about working to deadlines and you've got to get the story together. I kind of found it like a challenge, but a challenge in a good way. It was like a positive challenge. And then, like a lot of people, when I'd finished the freelance stuff, unfortunately the magazine folded, it closed down. And of course, I mentioned earlier, freelance writing isn't the most safe of jobs at the best of times, and I kind of drifted around doing all sorts of things. I said didn't do well at school. I ended up, van driving, stacking shelves, forklift driving, all sorts of stuff. And then I thought, well, it's kind of like one of these situations. You get one chance in life. What are you going to do? So when I was about 21, I went back and thought, well, I'm going to have a go at doing the freelance writing. If I've got to live on box of dry cornflakes for a week, and I get enough money just to pay the electric bill and the water bill or whatever, I'll do it, and build it up from there. And that's literally what I did. I mean, don't get me wrong, freelance writing can be it's wonderful fun. It's a brilliant life. I love it. But, there are times when literally, I've had my hand down the side of the chair trying to find a £1 note or $1 or whatever. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and, I can totally understand.
Yeah. But, for me, that's part of the adventure of it. It's, you're doing something in life you enjoy doing, which for me was writing, and you do it in a way in which challenges yourself, and you're really going to, it's kind of that make or break situation where you kind of, if you're going to do it, you have no choice but to sort of go down that path. So that's what I did, and then I began, I wouldn't say focused more on the paranormal, because even today, a lot of people think that's all I write about. It actually isn't. I would say a good 70% of what I write about has nothing to do with the paranormal. That's most of my freelance writing work. As far as my job's concerned, I do everything from fashion magazines, again, still music magazines, animal, wildlife magazines, a lot of freelance work for newspapers. I also do a lot of ghostwriting work for authors. I recently ghost wrote a book all about the realtor industry and the history of that, and also one about was recently contract hired to do like a lengthy report all about mesothelioma, people who've been injured in various industries went through exposure to asbestos.
That's right.
So, a lot of what I do has nothing what to do with the paranormal. People, don't generally know about that because often my name's not applied to it because, it's just doing research or contract writing for a publication that comes out under somebody else's name or a company's name or whatever. So
that's very interesting to find out that, because I didn't even have any idea of that. And,
a lot of it is, I would say probably 20% of what I do is paranormal. I think the mesothelioma asbestos industry injuries paper I wrote, I think that probably took up most of probably the 6 months of last year, sort of February to about August of last year. That's pretty much solely all I did, apart from blog posts and things like that.
Well, you've also written numerous books, and I wanted to get your opinion. Which one was the most difficult one to write?
That's a good question. I think all books are kind of different.
Yeah.
I think the most, I wouldn't say the most difficult ones, but certainly the ones that take more time and effort are the ones where you have the bare bones of a story, and then you have to go out, and find the rest of the information.
Right.
For example, I've done several books. One typical example called Strange Secrets, where you're focusing on government files. Now, when you've got the files, of course, you've got all the information in front of you, and you can crank the book out in a few months. When you've got the bare bones of a story, then, obviously that requires more like a, detective work and going down and trying to track down witnesses and old-timers and try and convince them to speak to you. So, anything where, the story isn't kind of sort of sitting in your lap, so to speak. It's something you've got to go out and investigate. And, that's happened several times. I wrote one book called On the Trail of the Saucer Spies, which was a study of how government agencies have secretly spied on people in the UFO research community, authors, lecturers, researchers. And, I got a few stories of people where it was quite clear that certain government agencies have been spying on them and watching them. The more I dug into it, the more I found that it was actually the case that if you weren't being watched and you're in the UFO community, you're actually in the minority. But this was a case of, really having to dig into these stories and interview people and file freedom of information requests to get files and surveillance files on UFO researchers. And so, but again, I enjoy that challenge. For me, the worst thing I could ever do would be, I'd never want to write a book like 50 Famous Abduction Stories, where you just go over old ground that somebody else has written and just, condense somebody else's books. It's just pointless. I always feel it's better that even if it's a challenge to go out and, it's a really in-depth investigation, it's better to bring something new to people than just have people pick up a book and say, well, hang on a minute, I've read all this before in somebody else's book or whatever. It's, there's no point writing a book like that, for me at least, anyway.
Yeah, because it just keeps getting recycled. Do you have a favorite? Do you have a favorite topic to write about? I know you said you write freelance in various genres, but what's your favorite thing? Like, it must be music, obviously.
Well, in terms of non-Fortean stuff, I would definitely say music, because that's sort of what that was my big passion growing up, and still is. whether it's kind of like a tragic thing or not, I'm kind of still into the same music I was into when I was like 15. Still kind of, I'm one of the, I guess, annoy the neighbours when you're in your 40s or whatever. It's kind of like a strange thing, which I suppose you shouldn't be doing, some people think, but, I think, what the hell, I don't care, But yeah, I mean, in terms of non-paranormal or Fortean or mysteries, definitely music, because, again, there's so many aspects, whether it's, CDs, somebody's new record that comes out, to concerts, comparing some gig you go to when you saw the same band 15 years ago, that sort of thing, or meeting one of your idols and how do they match up, to the image that you have, that sort of thing. In terms of the paranormal and mysteries, I would definitely say that the thing I enjoy most is probably cryptozoology, which is the study of unknown animals. And I wouldn't say I enjoy it more than the UFO subject, just in a black and white sense. It's more the fact that with cryptozoology, if you want to go looking for Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster, you've got to go out into the woods or the lakes and look for them. And I enjoy that kind of, like the road trip, jumping in the van or the car or whatever, hitting the road and crashing out on the edge of the woods or whatever for 4 days and, with your night scope equipment, and then, recording it all down at the time on audio, digital cassette or whatever, and then, writing it up afterwards. I enjoy that, the adventurous side of getting out there, which sometimes, the UFO subject, you can actually get the bones of a story or the meat of the story purely by interviewing people over the phone. Yes. Because, they're talking retrospectively about something that happened to them. But if you're going to go looking for Bigfoot, you've got to get out there, so it becomes more immediate and adventurous, I suppose.
Well, why do you think there's such a connection to humanity with the unknown? It's not just the paranormal, it's everything mystic, unexplained. Why is there such a deep-rooted connection with us?
Well, I think there's actually several reasons. I mean, I don't think it's just the fact that the world's black and white and we're longing for something more. I really do think there is something more, whether it's UFOs, ghosts, cryptozoology, whatever. And I think part of it stems from the fact that, if you look at today's world, internet, technology, TV, etc., it's seen as very much like a sterile, straightforward, black and white world. But I think if you ask everybody, kind of innately inside us, we all still have that sort of like primeval, almost subconscious feeling that, you go into the woods and there's something lurking in there. There may not be, but it's kind of like, it's almost like an inherent, inbuilt memory from, when we were cavemen or whatever, that, they would look out for the wild animals that might attack them. We still think of that today. When we're kids, that we go to bed at night and we think there's monsters in the shadows, or in the closet. Why do we think that? I think it's actually because there is this innate, inbuilt subconscious thing in everybody where we're fascinated by the idea that there's more to life than what there appears to be. And I think, ironically, the fact that there really is more to life than there appears to be. But I think part of our brain already knows that, even if we haven't been exposed to it. And I think also, that folklores, myths and legends fascinate people, partly because a lot of them do have a basis in reality. It gets distorted over time or whatever. But there are real mysteries out there. And I think, it kind of enriches people's lives and entertains them as well. But I don't mean entertains them in the sense that it's superfluous and not a real thing. It actually is as well. But I think we also, there is an argument for saying that people enjoy and to an extent need mysteries. And the fact that there are real mysteries, only helps the situation, I suppose.
That's right. Well, are you someone that follows or subscribes to the conspiracy theories?
Am I what, sorry?
Are you somebody that follows the conspiracy theory aspect of the paranormal genre, like chemtrails, HARP, New World Order?
Right. Yeah. I mean, for example, if you look at things like the New World Order, there's no doubt whether or not there's, some hidden body that is controlling the world or trying to manipulate it, that's one thing. But what I do think is that, particularly in the era of the so-called war on terror, I do think there's been a conscious, deliberate, and very scandalous attempt, which unfortunately has worked well, to use the war on terror as a way of invoking fear in people's minds and encouraging people to believe that it's okay to have our rights taken away. It's kind of like, well, we're fighting a war on terror, which means you should be okay about having your telephone monitored because we're trying to save our way of life. Well, my view on that is that if we have to have our telephones monitored to save our way of life's already gone.
That's right.
You know what I mean? It's kind of like you cannot save the world's way of life by turning it into a 1984 world to save that way of life because you've already lost it. And I think there are people in government who, as I said, have scandalously exploited the war on terror and exposed people to almost like, fear-driven tactics to relinquish our rights, etc., and think it's quite acceptable for us to be put through all sorts of crap which basically is really just a way to monitor us and keep tabs on what we're doing even more.
That's right.
I think, Now, to what extent, of course, governments and secret societies are in collusion to do this, I'm not sure, or whether it's just, some mindset that's come into play that, hang on a minute, we can perhaps, use this to our advantage. I'm just not sure. But, it's kind of like all the viruses thing, the flu virus, the bird virus. We were all going to be told we were all going to die of bird flu virus. Then we were going to die of, swine flu. Exactly. And nobody did. And you look at the figures of people who die from regular, normal influenza flu every year.
That's right.
It's thousands. But
I had a theory that it was more for the injection than it was for the actual flu, and we can get into detail about that.
Yeah, there's some very weird and ominous, again, where the truth begins and the rumour ends, I don't know, but there's a lot of ominous rumours about, the whole thing with the recent flu outbreak wasn't so much to instill fear of getting the flu, it was to ensure everybody got the injection.
That's right.
Which fortunately I didn't do, and I have no intention of getting it. If they want to line me up against the wall, I'd rather take the bullet in the head.
Yeah,
I wouldn't even take the bullet in the head, but I'm not going to be driven and controlled by fear every move I make. Most of us if we're lucky, 90 years, and if you're average, 80 years, I refuse to spend that time worrying about viruses, worrying about if a dirty bomb's going to go off next week, and so I need to relinquish all my rights. No, I'm going to do what I want to do, and everybody should understand. It's kind of like in V for Vendetta. They said, people shouldn't be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people because we're the ones who hopefully elect them. And if we don't elect them, then we should repair things to where we do elect them again. It shouldn't be the other way around. So.
That's right. Well, I wrote an article just the other day, and it was kind of surprising because MSNBC decided to put the entire blame of the financial fallout of the U.S. on Alan Greenspan. Now, I know he has a key part in the playing of this whole thing going into what it did, but he's not the only one. There's other people, obviously, behind the scenes that never get mentioned. So it just seems kind of weird to me that they decided to put him on the chopping block to distract the rest of the public and put all the other people that were responsible on pretty much a pass. And I don't know, I know you live in Texas. Do you follow the American politics right now, or is that something
I do. I live in Dallas. Dallas, is kind of like a very social, metroplex type area. Right. It's not actually Dallas, other than the overpowering heat. It's not that different to, where I grew up in England. You have clubs, pubs, restaurants, and it's not that much different at all. But what I would say is that, I think, when you're talking about the whole economy and, putting the blame on whoever, I think, unfortunately, it's very easy to manipulate the general public to see things in extremely simplistic black and white scenarios.
That's right.
To where, they don't question things. It's like, it's all, the parallel I would make with what you just said then about putting the blame on one person's shoulders, it's kind of like going to an airport, oh, there's a man with dark skin and a beard, he must be a terrorist.
That's right.
It's kind of like people have been dumbed down to such an extent that, you can say anything pretty much and they'll fall for it because it is presented in such simplistic terms, and they've been dumbed down, and it's tragic that, kids today, they can't pinpoint places on a map, all they're interested in is shoveling down more fast food, playing computer games, never going out the house and riding the bikes around town or whatever, like we used to do as kids.
That's right.
And they wonder why at 15 they can't recognize anywhere on the planet and they've got diabetes. It's because society is catering to where they want people dumbed down, they want them ill, so they'll get hooked on prescription medicines, which will bring in more revenue for the drug companies. And, they want a slave society, and unfortunately, they're making one, and they're succeeding. That's the tragic side of it.
No, you're absolutely right. And, in fact, I know it was angled as a children's movie, but I watched this movie countless times with my daughter, and it has the message of what you just said in it, loud and clear, and the movie is called WALL-E. I suggest for everyone, watch that movie. It'll give you a simplistic version of what you just said, and how it goes.
Where the crew are getting fatter and fatter on the spaceship.
That's right, the entire crew and every passenger on that ship, and they rely on automation. There's no such thing as doing something for themselves, and they just get fatter and fatter, and sort of stupid at the same time. So it's exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want people to get me wrong. I'm not doing this some sort of holier-than-thou rants and thinking, I'm better than everybody else. I would never say that, and I would never even think that. But I think it is tragic that it's very easy for a whole society to slip into that mode of watching TV, watching dumbed-down shows, eating junk, getting sick, and then before you know it, it's like, oh crap, the entire population has just changed over the course of like 10 or 15 years. And nobody's questioning anything. There's no civil right, no 21st century equivalent like civil right marches or anything like that. Everybody's just, oh no, we can't say anything because that would be unpatriotic. It's well, no, it's not. It's not unpatriotic to want your country to be as it was.
Well, that's the thing. We have to take care of ourselves. I know this sounds sort of selfish, but if your body and your mind is sick, everything around you is going to get sick. And that's the issue that people have to pay attention to, And also, too, if you have children, you want to be a good role model. They emulate you. And if you live poorly and unhealthy and apathetic, they're going to copy that to a T. So that's another thing to think of. Not to point my finger at anyone either, because I'm exactly like you. I think we're all equal. It's just awareness is one thing that needs to be, put forth out there.
Yeah, I mean, me and my wife don't have kids, but I mean, I understand that, it's not the kids' fault that they're brought up not really knowing what's going on in the world or even where places are.
That's right.
It's a lot of it is just through, fault of people in government and the education departments just not doing a good job. You don't have to have kids to see on the news that things are sort of going downhill. So.
Yep, it's so true. And, just the general confusion rate of young people as it is, and almost, as you said, they're in this zombified matrix of computer games, cell phone texting, iPods, everything is to keep the focus off of what's really going on. It's like a person with blinders.
Yeah, it's kind of like you watch commercials on TV, You know, and it's like, oh, you can now order DVDs from this store or whatever, and you'll never have to leave your house, or you can have this delivered to your house, and you'll never have to leave your house. Exactly. You know, it's almost like there's this undercurrent to make sure that people just stay at home and do nothing and just act like good little sheep. You know what I mean? So.
Yep. Well, let me ask you another side subject of this is chemtrails. I read a few things, and I just don't feel that there's a connection. There might be from your experience, but a lot of people feel that chemtrails are being sprayed in our atmosphere to sort of stop UFOs from entering our atmosphere. And with the rate of things being filmed every single day all around the world, that seems to me not to be the logical connection. What's your take on that?
Well, you know, I've got to be honest, Jason. I haven't actually delved too much into chemtrails.
Right.
One of the reasons being, you know, there's a lot of people who've done a lot of research into that already, and it's kind of like, you know, I wouldn't, you know, presume that I could sort of wade in and do what the research that a lot of other people have done for years and years. So pretty much my personal exposure to that is based on, you know, what I've read in other people's work. And I think there's some interesting stuff, you know, there's some weird stuff, and there's some stuff that's been kind of, I think, over-interpreted, if you like. Right. But that doesn't mean there's not a phenomenon. You know, it's just one of these things with, I guess, you know, with only X number of hours in the day, there's just, you know, there's only so much you can do. Yeah. But, you know, it's an interesting phenomenon, I'll say that much. So.
Well, that's a great segue. Let me ask you, is there anything that you feel personally as a researcher and an author that really is being overly hyped in the paranormal realm, or not enough focus is put on it?
One of the things, I won't say it's overly hyped, because hype's probably the wrong word, but one of the things that I think, particularly in the UFO field, there's an over-reliance on is the Roswell story. Now, not because I don't feel anything of significance happened at Roswell, but I feel Roswell has been built up almost as like a holy grail of ufology. Now, what I mean by that is that Roswell may well have involved aliens. It may well have been a genuine UFO crash. But if it wasn't, if it was like some sort of super secret military experiment or something like that, by building Roswell up and, to an extent, overhyping it, if Roswell came crashing down, metaphorically speaking, then a lot of the whole ufological house of cards would follow. And that would purely be because Roswell has been put on like a huge status position, whereas for me, I think it should be viewed as what it is, a very interesting case, but there are thousands of very interesting cases, and what we should be looking at is the combined evidence and testimony, rather than just focusing and making one case, in many people's eyes, sort of the be-all and end-all of proving that aliens are visiting the Earth. And I think in anything, when you kind of put most of your eggs in one basket, you're in danger of having, you know, it all coming down like a house of cards, so to speak. So I think that's one thing. And I think the thing that I think is underplayed is that I often find many people who are interested in the paranormal, when they're in company with other people who aren't, they're almost like embarrassed to say so. And, you know, for me, I'd never understood that. You know, it's kind of like, you know, if somebody asks me what I do for a living, you know, I don't feel embarrassed to say, you know, I investigate UFOs and run around woods looking for Bigfoot. You know, for me, that's what I do, and it's what I believe in, and, you know, I'm earnest and about, and, you know, you should hold your head up high and say, you know, this is what I think's going on. I don't see anything wrong with that. And I do find sometimes people feel they have to apologize for the fact that they're a conspiracy theorist. You know, well, if there are conspiracies going on, which there are, why should you apologize for it? So I think, you know, that's where the subject's underplayed as well. So
that's a great point. And here's a personal question, because you mentioned you're from Dallas. With the Texas Stadium being blown to pieces, do you think that there might be any lingering ghosts in that facility, since it has so much history behind it?
What literal ghosts do you mean?
Yes, literal and metaphysical too.
I see, in the stadium.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, that's an interesting point. I mean, you look at, for example, the whole issue of ghosts and paranormal phenomena. I think there's several theories, obviously. The one that's sort of most prevalent initially in the majority of people's minds is the idea that ghosts are some sort of spirit, which they could well be. Yeah. One of the things that interests me as well, though, is the idea that perhaps, there could be some sort of, we're almost watching like a loop of a videotape, an old videotape or something, playing over and over again, and that maybe certain specific events can kind of get recorded in the sort of the atmosphere or the body of a building or something like that, and we think we're seeing dead spirits or something along those lines, which we may be. I'm not sort of dogmatic about my views on this, but equally we could be seeing like a loop playing over and over again where kind of the imagery has got kind of caught up in the physicality of the building, kind of like walking into a kitchen and smelling burnt toast 3 hours after it burned. You know what I mean? But it's still lingering there. But it's not you know what I mean? Maybe it could be.
I totally know what you mean, and I can understand it. It's almost like a living facsimile of the previous host or person or whatever the case may be. And
I mean, it's kind of like back in England. I mean, where I'm originally from, England, Scotland, Wales combined as the British Isles. It's a very old country. I mean, the village where I grew up was just over 1,000 years old. And, particularly in Scotland and in the north of England, we get a lot of stories where people have been driving past, where there was a battle, say, 500-600 years ago, and they've seen what looked like the ancient soldiers, fighting with swords on horseback, etc. And some people have said, well, they're the soldiers who've died. But what if it is really like some sort of inherited memory, almost like, or even like a time slip or something like that, where you're not seeing ghosts, you're literally seeing a replay of the real events, possibly.
That's right. That's a very good point. Actually, the folks in the chat room here are asking and wondering, would you like to stay a little bit longer, since we did have a slight issue in the beginning?
Oh, yeah, I don't care. How long are we on for?
We're on for an hour, but if you'd like, I can extend for another 15 minutes to a half an hour, if that works for you.
Oh, yeah, that's cool. I can keep chatting as long as you want me to. I don't mind.
Oh, yeah. No, I'm glad. I'd like to ask, though, instead of just, slipping it under your
I understand. No, I'm quite.
And,
how long you just throw me off the line when you're ready to stop?
No, I don't even have to do that. I can just adjust it from here, But I also wanted to ask you, while I'm doing this, if you ever looked into the Skinwalker's Ranch, because that story alone is extremely bizarre, and it has so many levels to it. Would that be something you would write about, or again, because somebody else did before, maybe you would just go there for a personal interest?
Yeah, I mean, the Skinwalker Ranch is a very interesting story. What I haven't written about that, but I actually have written about several other places, particularly in England where I grew up, which are very similar, where you have one particular location which has sort of very high concentration of a whole variety of weird things. Now, where I grew up in central England, it was sort of very much like a forested, wooded area. And there was a large area of woodland called the Cannock Chase, which it's certainly not as big as, obviously some of the huge American forests, but in terms of Britain, it was a large-sized forest. Now, that particular area, the Cannock Chase, over the course of, several hundred years, there have been reports of everything from werewolf-type creatures, big cats, ghostly black dogs, Bigfoot, UFOs, ghosts. In other words, very similar to the Skinwalker Ranch. And you find these types of locations all around the world. And I wrote a book a couple of years ago called There's Something in the Woods, which was a study of various places I'd visited, including the Cannock Chase and various places in the US, where there seemed to be, high concentrations of several weird phenomena going on, where, for example, there were weird creatures seen in the same vicinity as UFOs, or some cases where Bigfoot reports were actually in conjunction with Men in Black reports, sort of, really weird areas. And, some people have suggested, like, with the Skinwalker Ranch, could we be dealing with things like portals and doorways to other realms and dimensions? Or, is it a case that someone is kind of, conjuring these things up from some other realm? The idea that, ancient rituals and rites are being used. There's all sorts of theories, but, the Skinwalker Ranch, the whole notion of having one particular area where there's a concentration of very strange stuff going on, you find these sort of places all around the world.
And what type of monster that you haven't written about yet would totally be the next book if you had your choice?
Well, actually, there's a lot of reports around the world of what have become known as goat men, which is kind of a strange title.
Yeah.
But they're sort of like the satyrs and centaurs from Roman and Greek mythology and things like that. But there have been a lot of reports of these sort of creatures, like cloven-hoofed, horned creatures, that obviously from the descriptions sound a little bit devilish, but they also, spark imagery of these, as I said, these ancient Greek and Roman legends. And I've sort of toyed with the idea of doing that. I've been on several expeditions also to Puerto Rico looking for the chupacabra, and I've written chapters in books on those expeditions, but there was so much information, I've thought about transferring the abbreviated information and, elaborating on it and telling the fuller stories and, using a lot of the stuff that I'd left out for space reasons and doing a full-length book on that. So, maybe one day I might consider doing that as well.
And I know we sort of touched on topics of the paranormal that have come and gone. Is there one that you have a personal attachment to, such as like leprechauns or fairies or pixies or any of that sort of thing?
Well, there's actually one story, probably more than any other, because it's one that actually occurred not too far from where I used to live in central England. This was a weird creature that was known as the man monkey, which the best way I can describe it is kind of like a British equivalent of Bigfoot, where there was a very old bridge crossing a canal at a little village called Woods Eaves, which is like a very old village, which hasn't really changed for about 300 or 400 years, literally. And sort of very atmospheric area. The bridge crosses over the canal. The canal's sort of about 60 feet below the bridge, and the entire area is shrouded in very, very thick, dense woods that has literally now covered the entire canal. There's like literally no space above the canal in this one particular part. It's just shrouded by a canopy of trees. And since the 1800s, there have been reports of this weird creature that's become known as the man monkey. The best way I can describe it, it's almost like a spectral Bigfoot, not a flesh and blood animal, but almost like a spectral, two-dimensional ape-like creature with glowing eyes that it seems to be its main practice is scaring people half to death. And it's almost like a cross between like a cryptozoological creature and a spectre or something like that, like a ghostly form. Right. And this one sort of got my attention when I was a kid, and because it wasn't that far away, it sort of was one that I could investigate. And I wrote a book about this a few years ago called Man Monkey. And the cases and the reports still go on. There was one published to the British government's Canals Waterway website a few years ago where a guy had seen this hairy ape-like creature at this particular bridge. And, I think when favourite stories always kind of come about when you have a sort of personal connection or you have a history with the story. And I guess for me that's what happened. It was one of the earliest things I ever investigated to where, I felt, wow, this is a proper investigation, so to speak.
Right. And what's your take on that new Yeti-like creature they're calling it that they just found?
Well, I don't think it's a Yeti.
No, definitely not.
No, what's kind of amazed me more than anything else is that the fact that some people actually think it is a Yeti.
That's right. Yeah, the confusion.
It's kind of like how would it get so blown up out of proportion to where the Yeti reported is like this 7 to 9 foot tall ape-like creature. It's kind of like mistaking me for an elephant or something. There's no comparison.
You're exactly right.
Yeah. That's what I don't get is how that sort of leap was made from one thing to the other. Now, in saying that, it's like you look at some animals under unusual circumstances. There was, if you look at the stories of the so-called Texas chupacabra that have surfaced recently, most of those are slightly mutated. There are some weirdly interesting genetic mutations, but most of the reports have been proven to be hairless dogs, coyotes, wolves, etc. But where there's been some crossbreeding, possibly crossbreeding with a type of wolf that is believed to become extinct, but that may not actually be extinct. But they look strange because they have no hair, and there's some abnormalities in the length of the jaw and claws. And so they look very, very strange. And I think that does happen sometimes where, you'll see a creature that has a few genetic mutations, and then people make this leap of faith that it's, quote, a monster or something. But it's not. It's just an interesting biological anomaly or whatever.
That's right. And you're absolutely right. Just recently, that police officer somewhere in Texas found one of those animals you were talking about on the side of the road dead.
Yeah.
They
look very weird. I've actually got a skull of one of them at the house here, which my wife keeps asking me to throw out. They do look strange. But no, I'm not throwing it out. But they do look weird. But you can have an animal that looks weird, but that doesn't necessarily mean on investigation it's not going to be found to have sort of a prosaic explanation. But again, that doesn't take away from the fact that there are weird animals out there, I think, that we don't know about. But we shouldn't rush to kind of class them all in that category, so to speak.
Well, what about in your investigation? Have you ever come across, actual viable stories of living dinosaurs other than, the typical crocodile or alligator?
Yeah, a few. I mean, one of the ones that I find particularly intriguing, and I wish, this is one of the things that really interests me, and I wish this could be true, but, and it's kind of like an exciting, engaging idea. There are a lot of reports, not so much from after about the 1950s, but prior to the 50s, and certainly through the 1900s, 1800s, and 1700s, of people claiming to have seen mammoths in some of the wilder parts of like Siberia and places like that. The idea that the mammoth might actually have survived beyond the Ice Age, and actually up to extremely recent times. The most recent report that I personally got was one that I found of two Russian pilots flying over a particularly remote area of Siberia during the Second World War, and said they saw like these two large hairy elephants just walking across the tundra. It sound like mammoths.
Yeah.
And I think that would be great if, I don't really, if you put me on the spot, think that the mammoth unfortunately still is around. But if you ask me, do I think it could well have lived far longer than science tells us it did? I actually do think that is a possibility, maybe even a probability. So, that to me, that's not necessarily a living dinosaur, but, in terms of it being something that science tells us became extinct long ago, it may have survived far longer. Now, there are also, me living down here in Texas, a lot of reports from down by the Texas-Mexico border of very weird flying winged creatures that sound suspiciously almost like pterodactyls, and it sounds crazy, but people report these things as quite literally looking like pterodactyls, like large, leathery, bird-like creatures. And it's difficult, I've spoken to a lot of these people, and they come across as just, regular, normal people, but claiming to have seen these weird, dark-coloured, very often gliding rather than flying, sort of leathery, lizard, bird, cross-type creatures. And it's, it's difficult to dismiss the testimony as having seen something that sounds just like that. And also, in Australia, in some of the particularly dense forests in Australia, everybody thinks Australia is just desert. It actually isn't. But there's been reports of a large lizard-like creature that some people think could be a surviving type of monitor lizard called Megalania, which was supposed to become extinct about 25,000 years ago. And this was kind of like the Komodo dragon, which a lot of listeners might be familiar with, but it was literally like 25 feet long, like a huge monitor lizard. And that, there are indications that might have survived extinction for far longer than people think. So.
I also believe just recently they also located a Tasmanian tiger, which they thought was extinct as well.